In this new section of the course, we'll cover some useful modules and directives outside of the fundamental Nginx configuration. And with the overall focus of the course leaning towards web servers, a good starting point is configuring Expires headers. Now, if you're not familiar with Expires headers, they're essentially a response header informing the client or browser how long it can cache that response for. So, for example, let's say we have an image, or more specifically a photo on our website. That photo data isn't realistically going to change all that often, meaning we can tell the browser to cache a copy of the photo for a relatively long time, and in doing so avoid any future requests for that photo, drastically improving website load times and, often overlooked, a reduction in requests to our server. Another resource like a style sheet, however, which could very well change more frequently, we could set to a shorter time, but still have the browser cache it nonetheless. Over to the configuration file, as we left it before, and first thing I'll do is clean up some of these directives from the previous lesson. Then, before we configure our expires, let's also, as part of this lesson, see how to set a generic response header. In this thumb.png location, I'll use the built-in add header directive, with the first argument being the header name, my header, and the second the header value, hello world. Save this, reload the configuration, and now to test this we can make a curl request to thumb.png, with the I flag for headers. I'll paste that URL, enter, and there we have it in the response headers. My header set to hello world. So knowing how to set headers, we can configure this location as a typical static resource by first setting the cache control header to public, telling the receiving client that this resource or response can be cached in any way. Then the pragma header also to public, essentially just an older version of this cache control header. Then a less related but equally important header, vary, meaning the content of this response can vary, with the value being accept encoding. This is something we'll cover in more depth in the next lesson, but essentially saying the response can vary based on the value of the request header accept encoding. And finally, to set the expires header on this response, Nginx provides us a very convenient directive called expires. We could of course have set this header manually, but there would be no logical way of setting a duration as the expires header's value, which needs to be a date. So with this expires directive, we can simply set a standard Nginx duration. For example, 60m, which is 60 minutes. The same unit notations we used with the timeout directives. Or 1h for 1 hour. Or finally, in this case, 1m, which in uppercase form is month. With this now, you can see better why setting an actual date wouldn't work. Let's say you set an expires header using the add header directive with a date 1 hour in the future. That date wouldn't change in the configuration, meaning in an hour's time, that date would be in the past. Whereas with this directive, Nginx sends the expires header value as a date, this amount of time in the future, for every request. Save this so we can test it, reload, make that same curl request again, and this time we get an expires header, with the date set to exactly 1 month ahead of this recording, including those additional headers we set, and another cache control header added by the expires directive, max age, with this being the number of seconds in 30 days, or 1 month, as we set it. This is essentially all there is to configuring expires headers, and given these new headers, a browser will now cache this thumb.png image locally, meaning on the user's machine, for this amount of time, before requesting it from our server again. Before we finish up, however, let's see what a more typical location for such static resources might look like. First up, I'll change this to be a case-insensitive regular expression match, looking to any request ending with an extension, so dot, CSS, JS, JPG or JPEG, or PNG. You can of course add a bunch more here, but this is the general idea. And not forgetting access_log off, unless you really want to log each and every request. Save this, reload the configuration, and this time, given that new location, try style.css instead, which now responds with those exact same expires headers. A simple but incredibly valuable addition to any web server.